going through the checklist, we're going to start at the air box, air filter. This one's nice, yeah, nice and easy to get to.
Yes, exactly.
I do like that about it.
Now, do you ever blow them out or you just replace them?
You know, I know a lot of people blow them out, but I really don't like to. I'll do a lot of the tapping just to get them cleaned out. Polaris's actual test for it is just to drop it.
Yeah.
If you drop it and you have a bunch of dirt fall out or something on the ground, they want it replaced.
Okay.
What I'll do is basically I'll just keep tapping it, get it cleaned out. If I have any discolored spots like from oil or blow by, or if I just have a bunch of mud stuck in there, I'll replace it.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you can just go around and get it cleaned out like that and you don't have a bunch of loose particles, you can keep rolling. I know a lot of people do blow them out with compressed air. I don't like doing it. Polaris doesn't come out and say don't do that anymore. They used to have it printed in their manuals, don't blow them out. Maybe they went to a tougher fabric. This is kind of like we were talking about on the other machine. This one has a sealing gasket and a tongue and groove. And if you've changed this air filter, you've already had this headache. But making sure that is sealed up and perfectly mated on there is a big part of keeping this engine happy. If you have any irregularities in this, basically a little bit bigger there or a little bit bigger here, you definitely want to check and make sure that's in there right. Steering system. If you have any problems with the electronic side of your power steering system, it's going to let you know right now.
Okay.
It's generally not something that's going to start acting up on you on the trail. It's going to happen right now as soon as it does its initialization. So right now we don't have any power steering light on. No problems. I could tell the power steering is working. No problems there. We're good to go up here. One thing to just be wary of, a lot of people will have their hands resting on here and then go to turn the key on. Sometimes that can cause an error code, which is a moment of panic if you're out in the middle of nowhere. I don't want to steer one of these things back with no power steering. So if you ever get that, if you ever just have a power steering light come on, turn your key off.
Recycle it.
Yep. I like to just give it a little wiggle every time I'm about to go for a ride, make sure I don't have any slack in that tie rod end.
Okay.
And the number one thing that kind of gets forgotten is the steering boot.
Does it slide off or?
No, it's got actually a zip tie on the inside and then a little friction clamp here.
Okay.
And they don't generally wear out. What happens to them is they'll get something stuck up, like a rock gets kicked up or a stick, something tears them. Yeah. But the reason I want everybody checking this is if that goes for a long time with that boot open, that will destroy that steering rack, and that is a long job. And as long as this boot is in place, there's not a lot that damages that thing. You can replace your outer tie rods, you can replace the boot, but once that rack and pinion is damaged, it's not a good time. They're not filled with oil. They're not filled with anything except a little bit of grease. Yeah. So just take your hand, kind of run along each side.
Make sure it's full.
Yep, and make sure I've got a little bit of dirt on here, but make sure you don't have any oil or grease on your hand, and you're set. Front and rear suspension. What I like to do, make sure you can't easily check your rod ends or basically your shock ends unless you have a way to lift it.
Right.
But you'll start to see if this is a worn out spherical bearing, you'll start to see a little bit of metal around it. You'll begin to see signs of chafing because it's metal on metal. Mm-hmm. They don't feel a whole lot, but it's definitely a good thing to check. Okay. And you can go around and check that, just make sure it's good and tight like that. Yeah. Still floating, nuts in place. And then you kind of want to just check the shaft right here. Yeah. Make sure you don't have any dripping oil. Okay. You're always going to have a little bit of residual.
Well, when it goes up inside the tube.
Yep, and you'll have a little bit of what they call sweat out of this joint and right here, basically where there's two O-rings. Okay. It's just going to be a little bit, just enough to make dirt stick to it and to make you kind of look at it twice and think, is it time yet? But what I go for is when you actually have a drip. If you've got oil residue coming down to the bottom and dripping off of the shock, then it's time for a rebuild. But just a little bit of sweat or a little bit of dust stuck to oil residue, don't panic. With the larger reservoir off to the side, they've got two very thin O-rings, top and bottom inside here. Yeah. With a lot of wear, you'll start to see some oil leak out of the top and bottom there. That one, if you start to see a leak, you do want to go in for service.
Okay.
Because those are very, very tiny O-rings, and once they start to leak, they're pretty much toast. Let's see, tires. Checking for any tears, anything like that. Looking for any odd wear. Something that happens a lot of times is people, if you don't have B-lock wheels, you can actually roll these slightly and have some dirt ingested here in this little sealing area, and you won't realize it until it leaves you on the side of the trail. So when I'm checking my tires, I'm looking for any dry rot, any cracks, and I'll run my hand around here and just make sure it's engaged all the way around. Valve stems, this is a good one that's very out there. This is very easy for something to grab this, tear it, move it around. So always grab the base of these, or grab the top of them, move them over, and look at the base.
Yeah. Make sure there's no junk in there.
Make sure you don't have any rocks, dry rotting, cracking, anything like that. I like to have the smaller ones just so it's recessed a little bit more, or a little bit of a house for it.
Absolutely.
But this is something that'll definitely leave you on the side of the trail. No plug is going to fix it. Lugs, actually, it's further down in here, but while we're talking about tires, I'm very strict on my guys and everybody I talk to about torquing these down uniformly.
Okay.
Aluminum, the aluminum wheels, they're a lot softer than most people give them credit for. They will actually settle as time goes on, put more miles on this thing. These are going to loosen. Headlights and taillights, that's a pretty self-explanatory check, but let's see if yours has the easy adjustment. Can you see this spring right here?
Yeah, I do. What is that?
That is your headlight aim.
Oh.
So bringing that in is going to raise your headlights.
Or lower the headlights?
Loosen it, it'll lower them.
Okay.
And that's something that kind of gets forgotten on a lot of machine, and is it'll make you cuss if you're out in the middle of the desert at night and everything's pointing up at the stars. So I try and tell everybody, back out of your garage, point it right at the back of the garage, and at the back of your garage you should be somewhere around axle height with your beam.
Okay.
Now on your utility machines you might go a little higher, but on the razors, stuff like that where it's squatting a lot when you're going across the desert, I aim them low. Let's see, and tail lights too, actually. That's not so easy to check by yourself. This one you can open it and you can see down. Coolant level.
Yes.
I get a lot of these overfilled. I like to keep them. I like to check them when it's cold. Keep it at max cold. But to me, this is one of the more important things to check on every ride, because if you boil a little bit out, or if you went on 5 rides before and you boiled out just a little bit every time, it could be low enough, like this one is, you'll start to get an air bubble if you ride enough times without topping it off. But that one being empty, you can check this. Make sure you don't have see if we don't make a mess. Yeah, this one is low. If you're out on the trail and you see something like this is low and it's all the way up to the neck here, you're okay. You just want to get back and get that filled up as soon as possible.
Just putting some water in it.
If you have to, really, if you have distilled water, that's the best way. Yeah, really just a gallon of coolant or a quart of coolant is best to carry it. Your PVT outlet duct screen. That is this right here. This is your outlet duct.
Okay.
And you've got this, they call it a screen, but it's a metal bracket that's basically just, it's just guarding from anything going back into your belt box.
Okay.
Rats,
Oh.
anything large basically can't make it through that grate to come back in.
Okay.
And it's cooling your header. It's basically just pouring out right onto your header. Where is your drain? Oh, here it is. I should have had this. I should have showed you this when we had the air filter out.
Okay, so that's a drain for the air filter?
Yes, sir. It's like a little duck
So
bill shape. Yep, it'll allow the water to come out.
Okay.
They don't generally get damaged, but what'll happen over time is they'll dry rot, and
If they fall out, then you got outside air just flowing right in.
yes, sir. They go from basically a duckbill shape to just open, and that just doesn't allow a lot of one way. You'll get a lot of trash in there. Spark arrestor. You can take a look over here on the end of your muffler. This is your spark arrestor. It's going to be just held on by one 8mm bolt. I generally don't pull them out except for a 100-hour service. You'll have a little bit of carbon built up on them, but what does take them out is muddy water. If you are ever in a deep stream crossing or any kind of muddy river, you're going to want to pull that out and clean it up afterwards, because it'll be red hot almost, and you hit that with muddy water and it just turns to concrete. It is a good idea just to look in there and make sure the mesh screen is in shape, like it's not there's no holes torn in it, anything like that. Your brake system.
Yes.
I always like to start at the top of it. Right here, just make sure your lid's on tight. We don't have any leaks or anything here. This one is well guarded, but you can still have the possibility of sticks or rocks coming up and doing some damage. I check for leaks, check your level.
Okay.
Make sure your level looks good. This machine, you can almost see your brake pads.
Yes.
You have a little bit of access. A lot of them we have basically tighter lacing on the spokes, and you can't really see in there. But if you can't see your brake pads, at least take a look at your rotor. Make sure you don't have any big grooves, nothing that'll catch your finger. Unless you can kind of cheat sometimes. If you can't see the full pad thickness, you can just see these two ears on the end. Yes. And you can see the space in between them. You know your brake pads are good. Yeah. It's harder. That's easier than trying to reach in there and see the actual pad itself. And brake system also. I don't have these come loose very often, but when they do come loose, your banjo bolts on the back of the calipers. Here you can.
Oh yeah. Never thought about trying to tighten those.
All I do, they're hollow, so you don't want to over tighten them. They'll snap real easy. Oh, okay. All I do is run my hand over it. If you have the least bit of movement at all, it'll start leaking immediately. Okay. So as long as you're checking that, just running your hand over it, make sure you don't have any residue. You don't have to worry about checking torque on that bolt, but it will immediately leak. Engine oil level. Yeah, they don't make it the easiest to get to.
No, they don't.
What I like to do for checking oil, there's a billion different ways to check it, but the way I do it consistently, I'll start the engine and let it idle for 30 seconds, turn it off and let it sit for 30 seconds, and then take your reading then. All right. Because that way you can recreate it every time. That's going to stir up most of your oil. You don't have a turbo on this engine, but that's a big problem with the turbo machines. You've got so many external lines and so much oil outside. One thing I try to make sure everybody knows is overfilling on oil is just as bad as having no oil. It'll actually foam up. It'll turn into just this big non-viscous lump inside your engine.
What is the timeline between changing?
50 hours. 50 hours is when I like to do, that's when Polaris suggests the engine oil change. And then we'll do all the fluids every 100 hours. Okay. But just between those two lines is where you want to be. But when if you start getting higher up here, especially a quart or even a quart and a half over, you will start to hear rod knock. You will start to hear bad things in your engine because it's just all foam. So just take caution in that. Okay. My biggest problem is people checking them at wrong times or checking them on unlevel ground, and overfilling or underfilling. So, and I know this oil filter is no fun to get to. There's not a good way to see it, but what I like to do is I'll make one paint mark on the side of my oil filter after I've installed it. Just one paint mark, that way you can glance in there, see that paint mark, and know that you haven't loosened up, lost any oil filter or anything like that. Okay. They don't loosen often, but it's just one of those things, makes me feel good. I can look in and see that paint mark and know it hasn't rotated. One thing they don't have on the list here that I think is one of the most important deals, batteries. Polaris batteries, or Polaris fuel injection systems, they're very, very sensitive to a bad battery or any kind of bad contact. Post-style like this, instead of the 10 mil bolts, they don't loosen up too often. These are nice and sturdy. Yep. But if you start to see any bit of green corrosion or anything starting to form around this, I don't know if it's the salt around here or what it is, but between 2 months I can have corrosion form on here. The first thing you'll see when you start having battery issues, like we talked about earlier, is your power steering. That'll go out. You might see some speed sensor codes, but that's the first thing you'll see is you'll turn this on, get ready to ride, and you just don't have any power steering.